the second episode of VGM Moments, a podcast dedicated to memorable pieces of video game music. I'm your host, Steve Vancouver, and as usual, we'll be discussing those very special tunes that help make a game even better and stick with us to this day. Our guest this week is the co-runner of the We Love Games Music Twitter account, and is a very vocal campaigner for the video game music in general. Please welcome Richard Stokes.
Good afternoon, Steve.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing?
Not bad, thank you very much. Yourself?
Yeah, not too bad, mate.
Good.
Not too bad.
I guess it's a very obvious question to start with, but how did you originally get into, or how did you realise that you really liked video game music?
Suppose it's probably really started, I think, if I go right back to when I first started actually taking notice of video game music as its own thing, rather than just being sort of in the background of whatever game I was playing. I suppose really when it was the I'm probably gonna start with the first Zelda game for 64, Ocarina of Time, because that was the first game that I actually also managed to pick up a soundtrack for as well. So I've got some sort of good memories from there. And I mean, playing through these NES, SNES early N64 days, I'd say I've got used to a lot of very good, decent music, but I'd never really sort of taken an awful lot of notice to it in its own right. I'd sort of just seen it as a sort of background to whatever I was playing. But the Ocarina of Time soundtrack was the first sort of soundtrack that really sort of caught my attention. And there's one piece specifically on that soundtrack which we will hear on the podcast later on. So
we will indeed.
And it just sort of starts from there, really. I mean, I'm probably, if I go back maybe 2-3 years now to, I suppose really sort of start 2013, so in 2013, 2014 was when I first started really being sort of a bit vocal about it in terms of social media, etc. I got to know a few people who were already doing the same, so who were already sort of fairly vocal about it as well. Mainly the first one I think was the guy who ran the classic VG music page on Twitter, guy called Mark
Robbins.
And I sort of started following his Facebook, Twitter page, because I just stumbled across the Facebook page one day and it looked an interesting thing to follow, so I did pretty much. And I mean we've sort of messed up a few times at different concerts and things, but I think what really got me involved was I think the best way sort of I actually got involved properly advocating the stuff was probably when I started posting with We Love Game Music.
Indeed, and that's something I'd like to talk to you about. Obviously, Priscilla created the Twitter account in 2014. You joined at the end of 2015.
I joined actually when I first started posting properly from the account was actually around this time last year. So I've been doing it over a year now.
Okay. So I guess I wanted to ask, what made you move from being a fan to wanting to be part of engaging with the community and actually being the advocate, like you mentioned?
I think it was mainly just the fact that I started noticing more and more how sort of good soundtracks were from other games, not just from the ones I was playing. So I was picking up notice from from Halo, Final Fantasy, Kingdom Hearts, Civilization, Warcraft, sort of anything, everything really. And I thought, you know what, this music deserves to be sort of have a bit more recognition, and it actually sort of get from the sort of mainstream classical music listening audience, really. So that's what got me sort of started on properly advocating stuff. And it's sort of especially sort of last year or so, it's just blown up, really. I've just been doing so many live concerts, going to so many different events, and just meeting people and just sort of networking, really, which is how I got to know the guys behind Classic VG Music, and also how I got to know Priscilla was through different events for Video Games Live, etc.
Excellent. What do you think your favourite part of actually talking to the community is? Because obviously you post these things and then you reply to them on Twitter. What's the thrill behind that for you? So what
really gets me motivated?
Yeah,
to
what's
actually
your driving force for engagement?
I think it's the fact just sort of meeting and sort of I suppose talking to people who are actually I found had sort of similar interests and like the same sort of music that I did. And then also talking to people who hadn't really properly discovered video game music in its own form. They sort of, again, they'd heard bits and pieces as background, or they might have stumbled across something in an article or another podcast maybe. But so yeah, I mean, just that's probably the main thing about it. It's just wanting to get the sort of music sort of recognised a bit more, really. So, and that's half the reason why I do it.
Absolutely fantastic thing to do. So what we'll do now, we shall move on to your first choice. Let us hear something from it quickly now. That was Athletic Theme from Super Mario Bros. 3 by the wonderful Koji Kondo. Richard, can you tell me why this is a very special VGM moment for you?
Well, for me, Super Mario Bros. 3 is still my favourite game ever, and it's one game I will go back to every few months almost without fail, especially in times where I'm sort of, maybe I'm feeling a bit down. I want to try and put myself up a little bit, and just playing the game and just hearing those little themes, whether it's anything from the athletic themes, underwater, fortresses, toad houses, wherever. It's all such sort of mainly happy music, and yeah, I can still have very, very fond early memories of playing, especially when I played that game for the first time. That memory's still very vivid to me, and so I had to choose something from Mario Bros. 3 because of that, really.
So, yeah, it is a wonderful piece. It's so full of joy, as you put it there. I think personally, I love that B section where after the do bit at the start, you have the floating in the air section. It just feels, especially the levels it's with when you're jumping from air platforms. I think it fits really well. Now, it is a 34-second loop. Do you think the short loop has a potential to affect your enjoyment over time, or do you think this piece sort of transcends that? It can avoid that issue?
I think I can probably say the same about a lot of the Mario Brothers games, because they are still one of my favourite series of games, and that the music, it's always been something that you might not take much notice of it at first, but it's something, it just sort of sticks in your mind as soon as it starts playing. Some of those, Koji Kondo wrote some very, very memorable themes, and for me, as it's been part of my favourite game, this is one of those that sort of sticks in my mind quite a bit. So yeah, I think it does sort of transcend time, and it's sort of one of those, I think probably the theme from the original game will be remembered far more. But Mario Bros. 3 was one of those very big moments for the Mario Bros. Series, and if it wasn't for these two games in particular, plus maybe Mario World, I don't think the series would be as popular as it is today.
I think definitely the third NES game was a major factor in its popularity. You're absolutely right on that. So obviously the series music has evolved quite heavily through. It's got the 3D series, you've got your Mario 64s going into Sunshine and Galaxy and onto that, but also the 2D series sort of came back a little bit for the new Super Mario Brothers series. How do you feel the music has evolved in that way? Do you think it's done a good job? Do you think it's a bit pared down compared to previous games?
I'll be honest. I think for the new 2D games, so like New Super Mario Brothers on the DS or the versions on the Wii U, I think I also don't think the themes are quite as memorable on those as they were in the earlier games, but they still, to me, feel like they still feel like they very well suit the Mario Brothers games, and they do. It does feel like music that belongs to the series. So I said, even though I don't think they're quite as memorable as the early ones, I still think there's a lot there that just makes them feel like they should be there, really.
Sure. You had obviously for this list I actually chose 5 pieces, but for this one there was an alternative one which I put as your honourable mention for the list, which is the underwater theme. Could you tell me how the underwater theme is that any different from the aesthetic theme for you in memorability stakes? Is that a word? I don't know.
Probably not particularly in terms of that game, but in terms of probably underwater themes from games throughout the series. For me, this is one of the more memorable ones.
Sure.
And I mean, I've heard a few orchestral versions of this theme the last few years, and they've all stick very favourably in my mind. So yeah. So I mean, again, I would have been happy to put either piece in my top 5. So that's it, really.
Excellent. So we'll move on now to your second piece, which is from the same composer and from a game you have given us a clue to earlier on in your introduction. So let's listen to it, and then we'll dive into our discussion. That was the wonderful Hyrule Field from The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and as mentioned by the fantastic composer Koji Kondo. Richard, could you tell me a little bit about this theme and why it means so much to you?
Well, basically, I'd say out of all the video game music I've heard in the last 20 odd years, this particular piece is my favourite piece of video game music altogether. It's also one I have very fond memories of, especially hearing it live for the first time as well. That's a moment I will always remember, hopefully, for the rest of my life. And it was also part of the first live video game concert I actually attended as well, which was the Legend of Zelda 25th anniversary concert that took place in London back in October 2011.
Wow, that was quite some time ago now, wasn't it?
Yeah, about 5.5 years. Again, as I said, it was the first video game concert I went to, and out of all the ones I've been to in the past few years, that is still probably my favourite concert I've ever been to. And I just feel sort of lucky to have been able to see it and to hear it, and just to hear all that wonderful music, whether it's from throughout the series.
It is a wonderful piece of music. Do you mind explaining a little bit about the first time you've heard it and the moment it's used in the game?
I suppose the first time was probably as we found out when playing the game on the 64. The first time you actually hear the theme is after you've beaten the first temple, or after Link beats the first temple as a child, which is the Great Deku Tree. And you leave the Kokiri Forest, you say goodbye to your friends and to Saria. She gives you your first ocarina, the fairy ocarina. And then you come out the tunnel from the Lost Woods, and you enter this sort of walled off path, and you follow this path along, and you come out into this huge expanse of field, and as soon as you enter that path, that's when the music starts playing, and it's sort of like a bright, happy moment, really. And I just love the theme completely because it goes through so many different tempos, so many different moods, depending on what is going on in the particular part of the field that you're roaming.
Yeah, the adaptive music in that is wonderful. Like how the B section is only ever there when you encounter enemies, and the actual final section, if you listen to the soundtrack, the final section, you only ever hear that if Link stands still. Did you end up purposely running around or getting into fights to try and hear particular parts when you originally played the game?
Pretty much, yeah. I was just one of those people who was happy to just explore every single part of the area, and then I would be sort of discovering the different moves and the different tempos as I was roaming around. So, like as you say, when we come across enemies, the music gets a bit darker, a bit more tense, and again, sort of running around knowing when that music starts, or when the mood changes, you know something's going to happen, but sometimes you're not too sure what exactly. Because sometimes when you look around the landscape of that field, it's not entirely obvious that you're heading into a sort of a dangerous area. And then sort of suddenly you could see this P-hat rising from the ground with these huge great blades trying to start attacking, and you're thinking, run!
I've only got a wooden sword, no!
Run, exactly. Yeah, that little Kokiri sword isn't gonna, and your slingshot isn't really gonna do an awful lot against that thing.
Not at all, no. Was this your first time entering the world of Hyrule? Was it your first Zelda game?
It was indeed, yeah. Yeah, very fun. Back in, was it 90? I don't think I got the game straight away. I got it about a year on, so it must have been about sort of early 1999. I think I picked this game up. Yeah, and it was, as I said, it was my first venture into the Zelda series, and from that game on, I was just hooked. So I've pretty much now played every single game in the series, and I'm at the moment currently working my way through Breath of the Wild as well.
Going on to Breath of the Wild. Now, music has always played a very important part within the series. I love the music for Breath of the Wild, but it's sort of taken more of an atmospheric approach to the overall soundtrack. There's some wonderful melodies in the towns and villages. What do you think of the new direction they're taking for the soundtrack?
As you say, they've pared it back a little bit more to have it just focusing on particular points. That while you're actually roaming the landscape, you're concentrating on what's going on around you, listening throughout all the different sounds of the creatures and the enemies. And because that game it's a vast area to explore, and sort of depth wise, it's probably got more depth than probably any game I've ever played, let alone any Zelda game. So you've got to really pick up on those minute little sounds of, say, crickets hiding in the grass that you can collect, or birds in the trees, or any beasts wandering around that you can sort of hunt to get your meat and that sort of thing. So I think in a way it's a good decision that they've not focused so much on the music this time. But also, plus, where you're exploring a great area like that, you're not going to really expect to hear sort of a great booming soundtrack. If you're going to hear much, it's going to be more in what's going on in your surroundings. And yeah, you probably might hear music playing in the villages and around, say, the Temple of Time, etc. In the places you expect to hear music. But I'll say in the general landscape, you wouldn't normally hear it in a wide open field. So I can sort of understand Nintendo's approach to that.
It does feel like they've definitely taken the Skyrim approach for that as well, to make it very atmospheric, very, you are on your own, there is no one around you.
Definitely. And it's also, this soundtrack in particular, it's very piano heavy as well. You don't hear an awful lot of other instruments. It is purely piano focused, all those little melodies, especially when you come to explore the Temple of Time the first time. You hear little snippets of these Temple of Time, Song of Time theme from Ocarina, but you don't hear the whole thing straight away. It's sort of very,
the wonderful little teaser phrases, aren't they?
Exactly. It's very patchy. But when you look at the Temple of Time itself and you see it for the first time, you realise why it's patchy, because it's been the place itself has been through a lot in the last, however many, if it's 100 years or so of the game's timeline. So, and it's taken
hasn't done well, has it?
No, it hasn't. It's had a huge knocks. It's got huge holes in the roof. All the windows are smashed. It's covered in grass. You've got bokoblins patrolling the perimeter when you first come across it as well. So it feels, it's again something that's been through the wars, and the music feels that way as well. It feels like there's bits missing, as you'll see in the temple.
Now, going back slightly to the Hyrule Field theme, obviously it was originally done on the N64, and the N64 didn't have the best sound chip in the world. Looking back on it now, there are so many versions around now. You've mentioned the 25th anniversary concert. There's obviously Hyrule Symphony of the Goddesses. Do you feel it's quite hard to go back to the original version now?
No, I don't think so at all. I think if we go to the version, the orchestrated versions that have been released over the last few years, I still think when you hear that and you hear the original soundtrack, I still think it still feels like the soundtrack has a lot of meaning, even using that early chip. And well, yeah, I mean, I still feel that it for me it holds an awful lot of memories, and I don't see why it hasn't really sort of gone down over time.
Well, it is a wonderful piece. This next piece is very different from the two pieces you've chosen so far. So let's have a listen, and let's see what we have to say about it.
Baba yetu yetu liye mbinguni, yetu yetu amina. Baba yetu yetu liye jina lako litukuzwe. Baba yetu yetu liye mbinguni, yetu yetu amina. Baba yetu yetu liye jina lako litukuzwe. Tupe leo chakula chetu, tunachohitaji utusamehe makosa yetu. Kama nasi tunavyowasamehe wale
And that was Baba Yetu from the game Civilization 4, composed by Christopher Tin. Now, it's a wonderful piece, one of my favourites. Why is it one of your favourites, Richard?
I think this was actually one that's I've only sort of really started to notice in the last couple of years or so, really. I mean, again, mainly it was through listening to the video game music shows that were played on Classic FM and just hearing it word of mouth from people and sort of seeing covers on YouTube, etc. And it's just one of those. It is a rather than being a fully orchestral, it is mainly it feels very, it's choral. It feels very like a world music sort of thing, really. And yeah, as I say, it's just one of those that sort of really caught my attention the last couple of years. And the fact that I've also heard it live in the last year as well, and to hear a version being being done live quite a fair few times now it just sends shivers down my spine every single time I hear it.
It changes how the piece is, like how you see the piece. It's
yeah. I mean, I think I can remember the first time I actually heard it live. I'm gonna go back to a video games live concert that was actually held in Dublin in 2015 as part of something that I've been sort of promoting heavily sort of in the last couple of years, which is the ID Music Festival, or otherwise known as the Dublin International Video Game Music Festival. And I've also been lucky when I first went to that festival back in 2015 that I actually got to meet the man who actually created Baba Yetu, Mr. Christopher Tin. And yeah, it was, again, he's a brilliant bloke. He's quite happy to talk to anyone and everyone. He's very happy to, yeah, I suppose, to talk to the community and to answer questions. And I'm like I will say some composers tend to be fairly quiet. They sort of like to sort of keep themselves to themselves. But Chris he wants to get the community involved. And when I've met up at events, he's always been very talkative. He's always been a good listener. And I say, if you want any advice from him, you can probably just go and ask, and he might be able to apply straight away, but he will try and get back to you when he can.
For those who don't know, Baba Yetu is used in the opening cinematic for Civilization 4, when you're exploring the different civilizations in the... Well, it looks a lot better than the little squares you get in the actual game. The 3D environments, and it's famously the Lord's Prayer in Swahili, which is a wonderful idea. I absolutely love the track.
And it also holds another record as well. It is, not only was it one of the first pieces written specifically for a video game that actually was nominated for a Grammy Award, it is the only piece written for a video game that has won a Grammy Award as well.
Indeed, 2011 for Best Instrumental Arrangement Accompanying Vocalist.
Indeed it was. I think the only video game album that's been nominated since then was Austin Wintory's score for Journey, which is again is one of, if I could have included, I would have included that in my top 10 as well. But it's just I think things like that. I think that's why partly I want to sort of keep promoting video games, because I want sort of more soundtracks and things to get nominated for big awards, whether it's for Grammys or BAFTAs or whatever, really, just so it gets a bit more recognised in the mainstream.
This is the most recent piece in your list. Is there something special about the older pieces that you like returning to, or is there something about newer pieces that maybe don't grab your attention as much? Do you prefer a strong melody in things, or is it something like that?
I think it's probably with the older tunes. It's probably because I I had a lot more time for playing games then than I do now. I don't with work and the video game music promotion and a few other things I do as well. I just don't get anywhere near as much time to play games as I used to. So these sort of older themes will stick a lot more vividly. But then that's not to say there hasn't been some really fantastic music in the last sort of 10 years or so. I mean, just looking at of all those that were nominated for the BAFTA Games Awards in the last few years, for example, and also those pieces that have been played on Jessica Curry's new show High Score, which started on Classic FM last weekend.
They're both excellent examples of great new music. So we'll move on from Baba Yetu and sort of back into the NES era with this piece. I'm be very interested to talk to you about this because it is slightly different than what I would have expected. So let's have a quick listen and then we'll get straight back into it. That was The Moon from DuckTales, composed by Hiroshiga Tonomura, but covered by Player Piano. Now, Richard, I'm very interested to see what made you choose a cover version for this list.
It's a sort of tune I've stumbled across on YouTube only within the last 6 months or so, and it just knocked me for six, quite frankly. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant, and the piano playing by Miss Sonia Belasova, who's the lady you'll see in the actual YouTube video itself. It's just incredible. I mean, she's an sort of a concert professional concert pianist in her own right, so she gets a sort of a lot of work in the States at actually doing concerts of proper classical music. But the fact that this YouTube channel also delves into a lot of video game, movie, TV themes. They also do little videos that they call On the Spot, which is basically where they'll take a particular theme and someone just say, "Can you play me a theme from this game?" And someone will sit there and will just start tapping away on the piano, and sort of the vast array of music she's got stored in that brain of hers is just, yeah, it's just a bit nuts, really.
I've got to admit, I'm a bit of a sucker for a lovely piano melody. Now, The Moon is a very well-known piece of music from video games, specifically from the NES era. Have you played the original at all?
I have indeed. I've actually got a copy of the original DuckTales game in front of me at the moment. it's, I mean, for me, platform games, adventure games, they're my go-to games. They're the ones I will spend hours and hours playing. And during the NES and SNES era, this was one of my favourites, and I thought a very, maybe not necessarily an underrated game, but it's just one that didn't sort of get an awful lot of notice.
What specifically spoke to you about this piece of music when playing through the level, The Moon, on the game?
It just felt like the music just worked with the setting, because, I mean, the actual level, it's on a, as the title suggests, it's in a sort of a moon-based environment. So basically, you're exploring this little moon base. You've got little bits of outside to explore. You've got these little tunnels and things in the base itself to go through. You've got robotic enemies to take down. It's also the first time in the game that you meet Scrooge McDuck's robotic sidekick as well. So again, yeah, the music is very, now it would be considered very, very chiptune-y and very, because again, with that sort of time, that's sort of limitations that the composers had. But so again, it's a bit of a cult theme as well. I think it's one that you will see a fair few YouTube videos of the original tune, or maybe sort of like slightly remixed versions of it. But the piano cover I spoke about earlier, it's the one that sort of took most notice of me, really, because I like a good piano piece anyway, and that's just probably one of the best piano covers I think I've seen of anything, let alone video game stuff.
Do you think the original still stands up?
Probably not. I'll be honest, probably not as much now, but we'll give it a little bit of a plug, I suppose. The game was remastered by Capcom and WayForward back in, I think it was 2013. So you can pick up a version of that on Wii U, PS3, Xbox 360, etc. But Capcom, in the last couple of weeks, have also released a compilation collection of all their NES era Disney games. Because at the time,
Disney
Capcom had the license.
Collection, I believe it's called, isn't it?
Yep, that's it. So you had DuckTales 1 and 2. You had both games from Chip and Dale, Tailspin, Darkwing Duck, and I think I don't think they get as much recognition in the platform genre as they probably should. I think they were all very good platforming games, especially DuckTales, and Chip and Dale's one of my favourites as well, and still is today.
I've got to say, I love the remastered version of DuckTales, and what's really great for that, they've included the original soundtrack in with the remastered soundtrack, and Jake Kaufman has done a wonderful job, especially with The Moon. They've added the string bit to it, and it's just... Yeah,
that's also, I like the version they did with the remaster back in 2013 as well, of the very sort of lots of guitars and good riffs as well. That was a really good take on the soundtrack. And also, one thing I loved about the remaster as well was the fact that for Scrooge McDuck's voice, they actually used the original voice actor from the cartoon series back in the early 90s. He was 90. I can't remember his surname. There's Alan. I think it was Alan Young. His name was. I might be wrong about that. So I'm not entirely certain. But he was. I think when he recorded the voices for the remaster, he was 92. I think so. He was already sort of getting on a bit then, and he actually passed away towards the end of last year as well. So he wasn't quite able to make to do the voice casting for the new cartoon series that I think it starts airing on Disney later this year. I think.
Yeah, it's not far along now, but he definitely did not lose any talent in his old age. So yeah, we'll move on from The Moon, and we'll go on to your final pick, which is, again, I think, very different from all your other picks. We'll listen to this piece, and we'll talk about your final VGM moment. That was Chicago Stealth from Perfect Dark by the composer Grant Kirkhope. Richard, this is very different from the other pieces you've chosen. Can you tell me a little bit about it?
It's from one of my Perfect Dark is still one of my favourite. Again, still one of my top 5 favourite games to this day, and it's also still my favourite first-person shooter as well. And I just think the music for this particular level, it just suits it. It's just perfectly suited to it. It's very, very atmospheric. It's a very slow piece, and again with the side name Stealth, I think the name suits it as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about the situation it's used in?
The situation it's used in,
other than being set in Chicago, of course.
Other than being set in Chicago, yeah. I mean, for the actual game, you basically play this sort of James Bond style secret agent called Joanna Dark, hence the dark in the title, and she's sort of slowly unraveling a plot about this sort of alien conspiracy to basically take over planet Earth, really. And this theme is actually it's from fairly early on in the game. I think it's like the fifth or sixth. I think it's like the 5th or 6th level or something. It's quite early on. But the premise is that Joanna's been she's landed in basically in this alleyway in sort of the middle of what would be downtown Chicago, and it's a very, very shady place. It's pouring with rain. There's lights flickering all over. There's sort of little dark corridors. You see this enemy agents are wandering around the place. You are having to be very, very stealthy, and you have to sort of be careful where you tread. There's sort of robotic sentry guns flying around. There's hovering vehicles that you've got to try and keep out of the way of, otherwise you'll get discovered fairly easily. But it's also a fairly short level as well. It's not one that will take you sort of 10-15 minutes to work your way through. If you're going on a speed run of it, you can do it in about a minute and a half. It's actually quite a quick level to get through, and it's also got a few nice little Easter eggs and sort of bits and pieces to find as well, which I think was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's a lovely little change of pace halfway through the track to a more energetic and slightly menacing second half. I'm guessing that's I haven't played the game, but I'm guessing that's if you're discovered.
Yeah, I mean it's a feature with actually all the levels on that game. The themes come in 2 parts. So as you get towards the end of the level, especially sort of like last 10-15 seconds or so, the music will go very up tempo. Especially like so for this particular level, you've picked up the piece of covert equipment you need to pick up. You've attached it to a vehicle so it can track your lead enemy basically. And now you've got to dive into this little warehouse without sort of being discovered. And it's as you get towards that bit, the music starts ramping up in pace, and you come across more enemies that you need to take out, etc. So yeah, and it is a feature with pretty much every single level in that game. It's not really something I've come across in too many other first-person shooters, especially ones around that sort of era. Most of the music tend to be the same theme going on throughout the level. Whereas again, this is very much more, as I say, it's incidental music. It ramps up depending on sort of where you are, what you're doing.
Gets you excited when the time limit's about to expire.
Exactly.
Yeah. So this was composed by Grant Kirkhope.
It was indeed Grant Kirkhope, and I think David Klinick, if I remember, was the other guy who had a hand in this one as well. I don't know. I can't remember whether he composed this, whether he's involved in this theme in particular, but he was involved in a lot of the soundtrack.
I see. From what I've saw, Grant Kirkhope was specifically for this piece. Are you a fan of his work overall? Are there any other soundtracks of his that stand out to you?
Yeah, I think another thing with Grant, he's been very vocal in terms of promoting music and getting it more recognition. So he's always been promoting say the new show on Classic FM. When the station has done their video game specials on as part of their Saturday Night at the Movies strand, he's always got involved. He's happy to share covers and to answer questions, and he just seems very. He's like Chris Tin. He's very sort of community friendly. He will happily he will happily answer sort of anything and everything.
He loves a kazoo as well.
Yeah, he does.
His work on Perfect Dark is probably quite different from anything else he's done as well.
Yeah, because he's known a lot more for his platformers, for Banjo-Kazooie, Viva Pinata, ukulele now as well. So yeah, this was something. It's a very sort of very different take compared to what he'd done in previous games.
I think even compared to like Kingdoms of Alamore, it's less melodic. It's definitely more atmospheric, which is very unusual, I think, for Grant.
Yeah, so it's not something you'd expect when you first hear this piece, and then you hear that Grant was the person who composed it. You wouldn't necessarily put the two together. You'd think it might be someone like maybe say Jason Graves or Jeremy Soule, or something along those lines. So yeah, to have that and Grant in the same sentence, just most people just doesn't seem to click. But that's where I think Grant is quite sort of versatile. Really, he'll try his hand at sort of any sort of music going really. And as you say, he loves the kazoo and he loves the ukulele as well.
4 of your picks originally came out on Nintendo systems. Is there anything specific about the music from these Nintendo games that you think sticks with you? Is it like an approach you think Nintendo has that makes you like this music a bit more?
Yeah, I think they don't. Nintendo, especially their in-house music teams, Koji Kondo and his contemporaries, most of the music they tend to write is very happy music in most cases, in terms of Mario Brothers, Zelda, Pokemon, Kirby. I mean, yeah, with Metroid it is a lot more sort of atmospheric, a lot more gritty as well. But they've especially over the last 25 years, they've written for me a lot of just memorable tracks from games which don't necessarily get a lot of mention really. So those sort of little titles that maybe sort of don't do so well in the games charts, but the music for me still stands out. And even for the games they're releasing today, like especially with Breath of the Wild, they've remastered the Mario Kart 8 soundtrack as well for the new Switch version, and also stuff for Splatoon, and even what I've heard for the brand new game Super Mario Odyssey actually sounds pretty good as well.
And with that, we have reached the end of your list. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me. I've had a great time talking about.
That's okay, Steve. It was a pleasure being part of it.
Had a great time talking about some great pieces of music. People can find you on your Twitter handle.
My Twitter handle is Rich Stokesy, and that is Stokesy Stokesy, because sometimes people tend to get the letters muddled around a little bit.
If you'd like to follow the podcast itself, we currently don't have any social media stuff yet because I haven't bothered to sort it out yet. But for now, you can just follow me on Twitter at TangySphere, and you'll find all the updates there. And then eventually, if it does get uploaded elsewhere, please do the whole like, subscribe, and rate thing on whatever platform you end up listening it to, if you indeed like what you heard. So yeah, thank you very much for listening, and hopefully you'll join me next time for some more VGM moments. Thank you very much.